Welcome to the webinar, everybody. We're so happy that you've joined us today. My name is Sarah Bunin Benor, and I'm a professor at Hebrew Union College, and I'm the founding director of the HUC Jewish Language Project, which you just learned a little bit about from our slides. And we are focusing on migration today, on ancestry, on mapping. And this is part of a three-part series of free webinars that the Jewish Language Project is running. And let me show my screen to show you what else we're doing as part of that series. So this is the first session. We're focusing on mapping ancestry and migration in Jewish families and communities. And then next Sunday, we have genetics in Jewish historical research. And then March 15th, we have genetics, language, and names in Jewish historical research. And I'd like to thank our sponsors, Hebrew Union College Jewish Language Project, and our co-sponsors, American Sephardi Federation, Anu Museum of the Jewish People, HUC Connect, International Association of Jewish Genealogical Societies, Jewish Gen, Jewish Genetic Discovery Foundation, Northeastern University's Jewish Migration Project, Jewish Unity Through Diversity, Yiddish Book Center, SAMI Sephardi American Mizrahi Initiative, and the Sephardi Mizrahi Q Network. So today's session and all of them will be recorded and posted on jewishlanguages.org on our events page there. So if you have friends who wanted to join today but couldn't make it, you can send them the link tomorrow. So our agenda for today is to hear from our panelists, and I'm going to introduce them now, and then they're each going to speak for 5 to 10 minutes, maybe a bit more. And then we will have a conversation, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. At any time, feel free to put a question in the Q&A area. We will be happy to answer some of them in our Q&A session. So Jacob Cohn is a volunteer for the Jewish Language Project, and he is the creator of the Jewish Language Project's Shoresh Maps, which he'll be telling you about. Simon Rabinovitch is going to be talking about a project that he created at Northeastern University, where he's a professor, called the Jewish Migration Project. And Ruth Messinger, a social justice consultant who promotes family immigration stories in Jewish communities, will talk about a program that she did with her synagogue. Raquel Levy-Toledano from the International Association of Jewish Genealogical Societies will talk about some research and initiatives that she's been involved with. And Susan Weinberg, also from the International Association of Jewish Genealogical Societies, will talk about her work in Jewish genealogy. So I now call on Jacob Cohn to get us started.
All right, so hi everyone. My name is Jacob Cohn, and I'm a data visualization and mapping specialist at the Jewish Language Project. And I'll be discussing our initiative Shoresh Maps today and how it can help you connect with your ancestors' journeys through history, geography, and technology. So first of all, what's in a name? Why Shoresh Maps? So we decided on the Hebrew word shoresh, which means the root of a tree, origin, or foundation. And in this sense, it's about discovering the roots of your ancestors. Our logo brings together roots and branches to the concept of arba kantot, four corners that represent Jewish heritage in time and space, where we've been, where we're going, what we'll leave behind or what we've left behind, and what we're taking with us. So the idea for this actually came about back in 2020 during the COVID pandemic. My synagogue in Northern Virginia had approached me to do an ancestry mapping project as a fun event for congregants that would bring them together over Zoom while we're all quarantined. And when I joined the Jewish Language Project, we started brainstorming about expanding this to North American congregations and classrooms. And the result is Shoresh Maps, a service that helps organizations, classrooms, families put their ancestors on map. So for organizations, classrooms, congregations, our maps can be a tool for education and connection. And we help families discover connections through these maps and the questions and conversations they generate. And even for researchers, we offer tailored mapping services. So it's a pretty simple process to get started. You just begin by contacting us, telling us your group size, any kind of form customizations that you need. We give a link to the survey form to circulate, and your respondents fill out the form on their ancestors, and then we make an interactive online map that they can share. So some more detail about these survey questions. You get a link to a password-protected form, and it has sections like ancestors' names, birth and migration info, and languages that they spoke. And you can even add extra questions if you want to collect data on respondent cultural heritage or heritage words and languages. We also recognize that ancestors' names have changed over time as they migrated, so you have space here to fill out their details. And one common issue, especially with mapping, that respondents might face is that they may not know in which country their ancestors lived. So for my family, for example, a lot of us came from the field of settlement, Eastern Europe. Sometimes we say Poland, Ukraine, Russia. It's all kind of a blur. So what our team does is we take the data that you provide and we do the work of researching that info if you're not sure. So once you've added all the ancestors that you'd like, you submit the form and our team reviews the data and your group receives the interactive mapping. So what does this map actually look like? Fun part. So you'll receive a link to this kind of map, which will show the birth locations of ancestors, their migration paths, and perhaps even languages they spoke. So there are currently two different map visualization options. The first is the default mode, which you see on the left here. Ancestors' birth cities are shown as points, and if there are many ancestors in the same region, then they're grouped together into clusters. So for example, this number 3 here we see in Bulgaria means that there are 3 ancestors in that region, and 1 spoke Yiddish and 2 spoke Ladino as their primary language in China. So what this does, this highlights common origins in the form of clusters, and also areas of diversity. So you can see that in the map. The second mode here is the heat map. So you can highlight hotspots where many ancestors were born. This is really useful if you just want to get a general comparison of ancestors' birthplaces. Like here we see hotspots in Poland and Belarus. So what interactivity does is it allows us to click on each ancestor and discover details about their names, where they were born and migrated, and different languages that they spoke. You can click a migration line to see the ancestor's journey highlighted on the map, and you can compare it to other maps. You and your group can also choose if you want to show your own names on the map, and if you do, you can select your name or others in your group and see their family's individual journeys. So here we can see Sarah Benor's journeys, her ancestors' journeys. Throughout this exercise, you might even find that someone in your classroom or congregation had an ancestor from your own ancestor's hometown or even nearby. So here's an example of 2 unrelated respondents whose ancestors were Yiddish speakers, born in adjacent towns in the 1900s in what is today Western Ukraine. And with Shoresh Maps, we want to give you a more complete picture of what an ancestor's world really looked like. So you can use this time machine feature to time travel to any year and see how borders and place names are different when an ancestor was born or when they migrated. You can even select custom years to see how borders look in that year. So here we see 1776, the US, American colonies, various territories. So with all this data on one map, you can even start to see trends in migrations and languages spoken. So here we're looking at ancestors' birth decades of the 1900s, 1940s, and 1960s. And we can see that if you were born in these periods, the languages you spoke in childhood would have been very different. So mostly Yiddish in the 20th century, early 20th century, migrating to North America. And with the 1940s, 1960s onward, we saw more migration to Israel and Hebrew being spoken as the primary. So this brings us to some of the insights your group could get from working with Shoresh Maps. You can discover linguistic diversity in your community. As you can see, primary languages spoken, other languages the ancestors spoke. And you can also discover how your great-grandparents' primary language might have been very different from your grandparents or your parents, and see that at an aggregate level here for your group. You can also see we have some lesser spoken languages like Jewish Neo-Aramaic, things like this. So putting all this data together, you can see language shift over time based on ancestors' birth decades, languages spoken. So for example, we can kind of see how in this data set here, Yiddish is gradually kind of becoming a lesser and lesser spoken language in ancestors' childhood, and Hebrew becomes more prevalent by the 1960s. We can also help you understand where ancestors migrated and how many steps they took to get there. So for example, on the left side, we see the birth countries of ancestors. On the right side, their ultimate destinations, and where they may have migrated to intermediate steps. So in the center, you can see, so my grandmother, for example, migrated from what is now Poland, used to be Germany, went to the Dominican Republic as a refugee, and then arrived in the United States. So as an add-on to our service, we also offer customizable posters you can put up in your congregation or classroom as really helpful and interesting conversation starters. So I'll do a quick demo of how the map actually looks. So if you just go to shoreshmaps.org/demo, you'll be able to access a demo version of our map. And as I was saying, you can zoom in, click a cluster to expand it, and this will show you different ancestors' birthplaces. So I click on one, and we can see more information about this ancestor, and we can see their migration paths if you want to compare. And let's say I want to filter the map, so I can go to this filter section, choose maybe, let's say, Ladino, Persian, Farsi, and Russian, and apply that, and we'll be able to see the data just filtered. Let's look at all respondents, and if we can pull up there's ancestors here, and we can instantly see that. Let's go back in time, so maybe go to 1900, and we'll be able to see which ancestors were migrating in that time period, and which ancestors were also born in that time period. Might take a few seconds to load, getting all the countries entirely. Okay, there it is, great. So we can see 1900s, Austria-Hungary, Kingdom of Romania, and what everyone always says is either Poland or Ukraine or Russia at various points in history. So at Shoresh Maps and the Jewish Language Project, I'm really excited about many ways to use spatial data, geospatial data, to provide a more complete interactive picture of Jewish life around the world and at any point in time. And this will enrich your own conversations and hopefully preserve collective memory for future generations. So looking forward to your feedback and suggestions, and welcome to email us as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Jacob, for all the work you did to make that happen and for that wonderful presentation. Now we turn to Simon Rabinovitch.
Hi, everyone. First of all, I just want to say thanks to the organizers and to Sarah, Bunin, and Benor for putting this together. I'm really thrilled to participate, and I will just share my screen. Okay, hopefully we're all set. So I'm going to talk to you about the Jewish Migration Project, which is really has a lot of overlap with the Jewish Languages Project. So I was really excited to see all the different ways that this data can be visualized and mapped that Jacob was explaining, because he gives us lots of ways to complicate and make our own data as we collect it more interesting. The first thing I just want to say about this project is that it's new, it's young. It only launched last spring. But it is, as I'll explain, it's a publicly sourced project, so it can grow with all of your help. So if you find this interesting, please submit, and I'll explain how at jewishmigration.org. So similar to the Jewish Languages Project, the Jewish Migration Project got its start and inspiration with COVID. So during COVID, first of all, I wasn't able to travel for my research and start to think about different things I could do with digital humanities and stay in Boston. And there were elements of digital humanities that had caught my attention. One was the idea of participatory archiving, and the Library of Congress had a project with participatory transcription archiving. And another, and this was sort of the more formative example, was a colleague of mine, Victoria Kane, in the Northeastern History Department, with a number of other colleagues at other universities. Really, from the beginning of the pandemic, very quickly put together a website called Journal of the Plague Year, which was a participatory archiving project that had a simple submission form where people around the world, anywhere, could submit an artifact broadly construed related to the pandemic. It could be a photograph of something that people experienced, a screenshot, anything relating to the pandemic. And then they told a story associated with it. And then this was mapped. And I used this with my students at the time. And this really took off, and I believe has tens of thousands of submissions right now, which creates this incredible database, sort of historical database of how people experienced the pandemic. And I started to combine this mentally combine it with my own research. In a previous project, I wrote about the Jewish Historical Ethnographic Society, which was a group of intellectuals in the Russian Empire who traveled around the Pale of Settlement, recording folklores, recording folk songs, collecting material objects, and made a plea to everybody to become Zomlers, to collect. But the idea was for some kind of museum eventually in the Russian Empire. This developed with the YIVO, which is still existing, the Jewish Scientific Organization, which is now in New York. And again, using this call to create an archive through Zomlers, the Yiddish term for collectors. This continued during World War II with the historians Raquel Mahler and Emanuel Ringelblum, who created the Oyneg Shabbos archive in Warsaw, again, calling for people to become Zomlers, not to forget. And the Yiddish Book Center in Amherst also uses this term to get people to collect Yiddish books. And so my idea was that we could, combine this sort of participatory public archiving tradition that goes quite a ways back among Jews and the new technologies that are available in digital humanities. I'm very fortunate that my university has grant funding for undergraduates to do research and to work on any project with faculty members. And so two talented undergraduates of mine, Liza Sheehy and Rachel Group, they built this website from scratch. I sort of gave them the idea, and they used Journal of a Plague Year as a model. They used Omeka S, which is an online digital archiving platform. They did their storage on Reclaim Hosting, and it took them about 8 months to put together this website, which you can still see, and we launched it in the spring. So the idea, like I said, is that anybody can submit any artifact related to Jewish migration, and we have a very ecumenical view of what defines an artifact. This could be a photograph of a piece of material culture. It can be a document, an official government document. It can be a letter. It could be something that people collected through their own research. And the idea was to allow the public to shape what counts as an artifact of Jewish migration, right? It could be from before. It could be from the root. It could be after arrival. But we thought for both of its public value and its scholarly value, the more inclusive the collection was, the better. You can see, like I said, it's still small, but oops, I gotta play this. Oh, it is playing, but it's growing. You can see as I scroll through, there's a sort of a pre-recorded demonstration. We have passports, we have menorahs, tea sets, candle holders, jewelry, mezuzah, like I said, some pieces of photographs, people's own research. We're going to get to, I'll show as an example what happens when you click on one of these artifacts. We'll go to the first one, the original, I think, or maybe it was the second one, which was my grandfather's naturalization certificate. So if you click on it, it opens to a large and high resolution, well, depending on what people submit, but ideally high resolution image of the artifact and a map of its root, an individualized map of its root, and the data that the person who submitted included. Here are just a couple of examples we have, like I said, in terms of taking this ecumenical view. So this is a concert program from Shanghai. The person who submitted this, who I think actually has joined this webinar. So her ancestor left Breslau and en route to ultimately to Chicago, but via Shanghai and San Francisco. For part of the war, this family member was living in Shanghai in a refugee community that had a lively cultural life in Shanghai. And so this is a program from a concert. And you can see there is the information and the story associated with the artifact, the image, and the map has been, and the route that has been put along the map. The person would not have traveled from Shanghai to San Francisco on that route that you're seeing. It would have been across the ocean, but there wasn't a way. I have to speak to Jacob about how to visualize that Pacific trip. Here's another one that this is after the migration that somebody went from Romania via France to New York. And to become a citizen, they had to declare their intention to renounce their Romanian citizenship. And this is the declaration of intention. And I have, with my own students, used some of these, even in our small collection, some of the documents that are already available because of what even the framing of these documents, what they tell us about the given society at a time, right? Whether they're using terms subject or citizen, whether they're asking for race, and a variety of other information, right? This is the mapping function. So when somebody submits, it goes essentially into quarantine and then is processed by a team member. Most of that is just sort of looked over and made sure it's okay, and then it automatically populates. But the one part that needs to be done manually is the mapping, right? So if you mention the route and there's several places, that is manually put in by the team member, and we get this both the individual map that's associated with the artifact, but they all get populated in this larger map, which you can zoom in and sort of disaggregate the data. We put a lot of thought, a lot of work into determining what the information was that should go into the submission form. And so you can see here the criteria, but like I said, a very, very ecumenical view in terms of scanned correspondence, travel papers, visas, legal documents, photographs of objects. And in terms of the form itself, we tried to make it both as clear and as simple to use as possible. So you provide the name, you provide where they're from, you provide the route, right? And as Jacob pointed out, there can be issues with, let's say what country a particular location was in. But since the mapping part we do manually, we can do that research if there's enough information about what the original name is. I have here just a sort of brief demonstration that I pre-recorded with me giving the information about my own grandfather, the artifact I mentioned before, just to show how it works and how easy it is to use. But to be honest, you don't need to look at my my poor typing. The other thing that we've really worked on is trying to set this up in a way that it will be self-propelling. So we've created educational materials and a section for educational materials that people can use and people can download. These are my instructions, or our instructions, on how to not only become a Zommler, but host your own workshop on doing this on your own, to show people, like Jacob was saying, as a congregational exercise or as a family exercise, that people, or of course educationally, that people can do this together. So we created both sort of a how-to guide on how to host a workshop, and also a pre-workshop handout that people can distribute. Because one thing that I did discover was that the gap between interest in the project and actually submitting an artifact is significant, right? People are very interested in doing this, but they don't tend to do it until you are sitting there with them, or someone is sitting there with them, helping them to do it. So we created these sort of educational materials to help people to become their own, emissaries and Zommlers, as well as assignments for the elementary and middle school level.
Simon, we have to wrap up in just a minute.
And that's really the entire that's the entire project, and you can find it at jewishmigration.org, and those are my students who are leading workshops and presenting.
Wonderful. Oh, thank you so much. Very interesting, important work. We now turn to Ruth Messinger.
Hi, I'm in awe of, I love that you brought us all together, Sarah, but I'm in awe already of what Jacob and Simon are doing, because I think I have communities that would be interested in this. My project, I actually have two projects, one you don't know about, but I'll mention it. But they're simpler, and they really have as their origin my ongoing work with today's immigrants. And so my interest is in helping people, particularly in the Jewish, but also in any community, but starting with the Jewish community, know their own background so that they will be able to make analogies and develop empathy for current immigrants who are, in almost every instance, experiencing virtually the same things that our various ancestors did. But that said, then we turn to really what you've already heard, except I started not with any kind of scientific base, but with my own congregation, which is the Society for the Advancement of Judaism. It's the original Reconstructionist synagogue, several hundred families. And I just asked people if they would submit a photograph and a little bit of information as to who the photograph was of, some ancestor who had arrived here, where they came from, and about when they came. And the idea originally was to drive home to what's true in almost all Jewish communities and congregations where I speak, that most people are second generation Americans. And that should make them think differently might make them think differently about ongoing waves of immigration in their lifetimes. And certainly in New York, where we've absorbed 500,000 immigrants since August of 2022. Then I was fortunate enough to be mentioning my obsession with people knowing about people's backgrounds to a very good friend of mine who is Rachel Serrati, who may be on this call, who is a photojournalist, and said I wasn't quite sure what to do if people actually started sending in the photos. And I will tell you that what I envisioned was, like a large corkboard, and people should post up their things in just a little note. And Rachel is a photojournalist by training, and she and her husband are TJ Kirkpatrick, are artists. And she said, oh no, we have to do this right. So they came up with the notion that everybody who submitted a photograph, the focus was to be on a wall in the synagogue. So we got, it's hard to get real estate anyplace, but we got a wall committed to us for the photographs. And then what Rachel and TJ did, they happened to live in Maine. And so they drove through New England and bought old frames. So there's this beautiful wall, and you can see it. But each of those pictures, which is kind of exciting, the picture was submitted by a congregant, but the framing was just TJ and Rachel looking for different kinds of sort of older frames and then putting them on building a wall. We would like the wall to be bigger. We would like more of our congregants to do this. And we are urging any house of worship or community, any faith, to do this kind of a wall. What you can't quite see there, which is okay, is that in the center on the right is a short explanation of the project, which I pretty much just gave you. And on the left, in the center, is a mirror, which makes the point when people are standing and looking at the project. Just for fun, I will tell you, if you look at the mirror in the center, and you look at the photo above, the two frames above, the one frame with two photos in it, right above the mirror, the one on the left is my maternal grandfather, and the one on the right, which you can't see very clearly, is me as a child with my father and my paternal great-grandfather. So everybody has pictures on this wall, and we're urging more people to do this. And then we have put out a book, which is, who we are. And the book has the stories that people sent, edited to be about a page. It would fit really nicely, Jacob and Simon, with some of what you're doing. I'd love to, we're about to figure out a way, or Rachel is going to figure out a way to get the book online. And you might then be able to suggest to me more things we could do with this community of people. We did already find, as you said before, one or two of the connections, people whose grandparents came from the same town, which made them quite curious about how they might be connected to each other. But the idea is for this to be a living wall in every house of worship, where in New York, people are always from different backgrounds. We're pleased to note, with no connection to us, but that the cathedral, the Catholic cathedral, in which everybody knows, on Fifth Avenue and 50th Street, has recently commissioned a mural, which is not individual ancestry, but but tells a story of immigrants from Ireland, and is a very large piece of the entrance of the cathedral. So somebody else had the same kind of idea, I'm delighted to say. We've been urging other congregations to do this, sharing the book. And as I said, we're going to put the stories online. We've already had one evening with people sharing their stories. Some were just hilarious. And related also to the question that you guys raised about language. The one I remember is one person whose grandfather got employment because he promised his wife, they were brand new immigrants, that he would find a job. And he went to a construction site where he heard the construction manager yelling at somebody, "You will never make a plumber." And so he waited until that interchange was over, and then he went up to the guy and he said, "I'm a plumber." He had no idea what a plumber was. But he said, "I'm a plumber," and he got hired. he became a plumber. But the other project, Sarah, which I might just mention as long as I have a little airtime, which Rachel and TJ are also working on with me, is a little different, but you'll all understand the purpose of it. And it's interesting that one of you mentioned working with students, because they are, Rachel and TJ, looking for some student groups around the country to whom they want to do three things, I guess. Actually teach students this idea that we all come from someplace. Teach students a little bit about how you do the simplest kind of research to find people's immigrant backgrounds, because what we want to put out is a short booklet that lists that identifies the immigrant ancestry of every one of the 535 members of Congress, for obvious political purposes. But we think it's probably, our guess is that it's pretty available, because people public figures often put their biographical stories up in a little box, and the little box will say something like, my grandmother came from Poland and my grandfather came from Ireland. And that's what we want. So that's all we need in this case. We're not looking right now for the longer stories. So that's the second project, is simply to, rather than doing the research ourselves, Rachel and TJ had the idea of finding groups of students who would do the research for a particular state or a particular region, and in the process would learn something about what you guys are all doing about demographic research, and also something about the importance of learning where people come from. So that's the idea. The exhibit's been up for about, I lose all track of time, but a couple of months. The congregants love it. And where people are now saying, like, how come I didn't read the 7 emails you sent? And if I send in the information now, could I get in the website? So the answer is yes.
Wonderful.
We're eager to expand it, and Rachel and TJ will do a manual if people are interested, explaining about the work they did just to put it all together.
That would be great.
That's the story. And Sarah found me because there was a story about it in JTA. Oh, that's how information.
An article that you wrote, like explaining what you did and why you did it, right?
Right.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ruth. We now turn to Raquel.
How do I do that?
It's that little square next to the minus sign on the bottom, I think. The presenter mode.
Okay. I will do it again. It worked later. No. Oops.
That little icon on the bottom next to the minus sign.
Yeah, what I cannot do is to show this okay. Does it show?
Yes, we see your notes, but that's okay.
No. Okay, let me, yeah, you see my note, but I had some animation, which is a pity not to show.
Oh, yeah, if you click the little presenter icon, then it should work. It's next to the minus sign on the bottom, a little lower to the right.
Okay. I don't see it.
The little icon
anyway,
next.
So let's do that.
Okay.
Let's do it that way. Okay. Yeah, so first of all, thank you, Sarah, for putting together this webinar, and thanks to all the presenters who shared with us their fascinating project. What I'd like to tell you about are 2 different ways to look at migrations. One would be my family dress, great dress, which I will just talk about, and the other way will be genetic. So this dress actually traces its origin back in medieval Spain, and it is worn today, until today, from the time it came to Morocco until today, at the Hana celebration that takes place few days before the wedding. This precise dress has been made for my great aunt here, Mesodi Zafrani Afriat, and it was worn by my grandmother here, Hasiba Zafrani Zrien, and all the descendants of these two women wore that dress few days before their wedding. Here I am, here are my children, and you can see that it was worn for 5 generations already. And I call this tree the family tree of the great dress. So this great dress, because I know you are interested in languages, in Jewish languages, it is called El-Kswa El-Kbira in Judeo-Arabic, and Berberiska or Traje de Berberiska in Haketia, which is the language that is spoken in north of Morocco, which is Spanish Judeo language. So this dress has traveled. First of all, it traces its origin in Spain, so it continued in Morocco. This specific dress was made by a Moroccan artisan for my great aunt. It was worn for almost a century and a half, or a century at least, in Morocco. We brought it with us to France, and from France it was not only landed to all the family, friends, etc., but also it was worn by all the descendants of my grandmother and my great aunt, and it went to United States, to Canada, to Israel, and to many other countries that I don't know where it went. So this dress really tells a migration story. As I said, the origin was in Spain. It continued in Morocco after 1492, when Jews were expelled from Spain, and it was worn in Morocco and today in the Moroccan Jewish diaspora. So it represents cultural continuity and preservation through migration, and the dress itself is an evidence of the Sephardic migration from Spain to Morocco. So let me turn out now to another type of evidence, which is genetic. The Y chromosome, and I will focus on the Y chromosome. So the Y chromosome is interesting to study migration because it's passed directly from father to son, and it doesn't change, and it actually virtually unchanged through generation. It allows to trace paternal lineages across thousands of years. And here what I'm showing you is my paternal Levy line. So this study was done in the frame of Avotenu DNA project, where we have identified about 700 Jewish line. So this is my paternal Levy line. Here is my late uncle who was tested, who sadly passed away a month ago. And the more ancient ancestor is that man here that was born about 3,700 years ago, probably in the Middle East and the ancient land of Canaan, because his contemporary descendants, some of his contemporary descendants are Palestinian. The next ancestor here was born 2,400 years ago, and since most of his descendants, Sephardim and Ashkenazim, are Jewish, we can assume that he also was Jewish 1,400 years ago. The closest ancestor to my uncle is that man here that was born, this ancestor that was born about 1850 years ago. And we believe that we carry the name Levy since then because most of his descendants, if not all, are named Levy or have a Levy tradition. And last, in about 1400 years ago, this line split into two branches, one Sephardi and one Ashkenazi branch, that probably this split occurred perhaps in the land of Israel, or somewhere else, somewhere in Europe, in the Balkan, or in Italy. And there are even more interesting matches to this Y chromosome. The first is a man from Peru with a most recent common ancestor shared with us that was born about 600 years ago, at about the time when Jews were expelled from Morocco, and that let us think that our Levy line came from Spain to Morocco. A second match that is extremely interesting is that a man named Levy from Capo Verde, actually it turned out to be my third cousin twice removed, and our common ancestor that we could identify by genealogy, and was born around 200 years ago, and probably went to Portugal and then to Capo Verde. So all of this allowed me to rebuild the journeys of this Levy line, which is my family line. So first, this line came from the Middle East to Spain. From Spain, it went to Morocco. One branch went from Morocco to Portugal, and from Portugal to Capo Verde. And my own branch came to France. Some of my cousins went to Israel, others went to Canada. So here, with the Y chromosome, we could follow the migration of this family. So I showed you two tools that allowed me to analyze the migration of my family, this great dress that carries a lot of personal and emotional history. And it told us that most probably we came from Spain. Our family was Sephardic from Spain to Morocco. And now this dress has been traveling all over the world. The Y chromosome of my paternal family allowed me to look at and to examine the movement of this line through millennia. So I showed you two tools to tell you the same story, which is a story of migration. Thank you.
Thank you, Raquel. Wow, so interesting. We now turn to Susan.
Okay. Let me share. Oh, here we go. Okay. And I am talking from the standpoint of genealogy. So you're going to hear mapping through a genealogical lens, and I just want to comment on some of the presentations thus far. They're very interesting and they all connect. I suspect that, though, that when in doing the mapping project, you probably have a mixture of people who submitted, some who actually have gone down the genealogy rabbit hole, and others who may know from folklore. Maybe they did an oral history, maybe it was passed down. I will tell you from my experience in doing research for other people that they don't always get the right town. There are many towns that sound very similar, and there's many transcription errors also that capture that. So I think genealogy research is important to really have a more robust database and more verifiable information. So one of the things that, let's see here. I do a talk on this. I'm not going to do that, but I wanted you just to see the sources of material that tell you where families came from. And that's something that I think would be very useful to build out because you're not getting the people who don't know. And the people who think they know may not always be correct. So I think it would be a helpful element to add to the process to pull more people in and to also help other people go deeper. And there's, a process around all of these. Some are very straightforward. The other thing that I would emphasize is that it's not always from point A to point B, from A being in Europe and B being somewhere in the United States. If you're doing birth, maybe it is. If you're looking at where they actually lived, it can vary. So I think it's important to look a little more broadly as if people get into the genealogy aspect of it. And I wanted to just give you this example from some research that I've done for somebody who we tracked the family to Kupiskas, Lithuania. In the 1897 census, it had 3,700 people, 71% Jewish. They'd had a Jewish community there for over 300 years. But they moved when they had children, and the town they moved to was across the border in Latvia. It was known as Dvinsk, now it's Daugavpil, and it was the big city. 72,000 people, 45% Jewish. Why did they move? I think it's important to look at the whys. Job opportunities, 77% of the industry was owned by Jews. They had some large factories. Schooling, especially religious and professional training, they had more. It was much more developed just by virtue of size. And what was interesting was there was a listing of at least 100 people, and that's head of household. So you're talking a broader, much multiply that by however many people you think are in the household, that were registered in Kupiskas, which meant that that was where they supposedly lived, but they were living in Dvinsk. So it wasn't just this family that I was doing research for. There was definitely a connection between these two towns, going from the small town to the much larger city. So, I think that you can begin to expand as you work with that. Where they went to in the United States, same thing. They went to usually a large port city, Boston, Philadelphia, New York, got the bulk of them. And that created there's some things that's developed out of that. Basically, the Jewish population in New York was huge. By 1900, there were 500,000 Jews in New York. That was a concern to the established German Jews because they were concerned it was going to stir up anti-Semitism. And they wanted to get them out of New York. So there were programs to do that. And Baron de Hirsch, you'll hear his name a lot if you do any research in that area. He actually negotiated with Russia to help Jews get out of Europe, out of Russia. And then he funded a program called the Industrial Removal Office. And this was a program that worked with people in New York, found them jobs throughout the central United States, and helped them with transportation and getting settled in a new environment. And they went around and they identified areas where they felt, that where they were receptive, and they had agents that were in those areas. So this is what they call a removal form. And what were they removing? They were removing Jews. It's not as nefarious as that sounds. They were taking them from New York and putting them in central United States. And on this form, it will tell you their address in New York. And then these are some of the towns that they were going to just on this page. I mean, there are many, many towns. It will also tell you how long they had been in the United States. And that's usually a matter of months, because once they got settled in New York, they couldn't get them out of there. So they tried to get them early. And so that you can work back to their immigration records from that. This is all online. You can access this at the Center for Jewish History. You can find the indices, and then you can go to Ancestry, type in Industrial Removal Office, and you'll actually get an archive that is available there. So I think that's really important. The other thing I want to mention is when Jews came to America, their immigration pattern was very different than others. When they came, they were pushed out. There might have been a pool of economic opportunity, but my grandfather talked of he was going to be drafted if he didn't leave, and that was not uncommon. My grandmother came after World War I because you couldn't really come easily during World War I. Her child had died in a pogrom. So Jews were leaving that. They didn't come back generally. They came with families. They came to stay. Other ethnicities often did not. They would go back and forth. So I think that is an important aspect to consider. I want to just give you an example on the of artifacts. I was very interested in what Simon talked about and the fact that there are documents, because documents are really important, and that's what we in genealogy deal with. And I want to share a personal story of a document in my family that fits that characteristic that he described. When I first began my genealogy research, it was because my mother she came to visit and she brought a box. Every time she came to visit, she took a box from her house and tried to move it to my house. And in this box, she gave me something she wanted me to have, which was 3 typewritten pages on which my grandfather had recorded where he came from, why he came to America, and what he did when he got here. So that was golden. And I began fact checking him. Ellis Island had just gone online, and I started searching for immigration records. I found many family members, but my grandfather was the elusive one. I could not find him. One day I was complaining to my mother that I had searched for every Jaffe that ever came to New York, and she said, "Oh, I think he changed his name. He wrote me a letter once, and he said it was too hard to spell and pronounce." And she produced the letter. And here is the letter. And at the end, you will see he says, "In the year of 1911, I, Mr. Benjamin Shisher, or Schicker was my name, it was too hard for me to spelling. So I start to call myself Jaffe until to this day." So written in, his immigrant English, but clear, he tells the whole story, and it's really a powerful thing. So ask for letters. It never occurred to me in a million years to ask for a letter until that moment. And then my mother pulls out a whole sheaf of letters. But this one was the one that was really, the important one for this purpose. So I think also the work of creating exhibitions of individual family histories is really important in engaging people in their family history. So I'm kudos to Ruth for that effort. In genealogy, we're all thinking about how do we pass on what we're doing to the next generation. And that starts with engaging them. I'm an artist as well as a genealogist, and I did a series of artwork on my own family history. My nieces came to a talk that I had done, and one niece became really enamored with my grandmother's immigration story. She turned it into performance art with dance and voiceover. So you never know where it's going to go once they grab hold of it. But it starts with story, and that I think is how we engage them. And each of these efforts is really focused on that element. So that's a really important aspect of these projects. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Susan. And I'm just going to show an image from the Industrial Removal Office. This is a map that they gave out in Yiddish that had, Yiddish names for places that they were interested in removing people to. So thank you. Wow, this was so rich, really interesting projects and descriptions of the work that you're doing. I want to ask some questions of everybody. First of all, we have heard a lot about various levels that these projects can help the individual, the family, talking about connections and knowing about your ancestry, but also organizations like synagogues, schools, those communities that can help bring them closer together. It can help to raise awareness about current immigration. But I'm wondering, what is the potential application for research? One of the questions had asked about whether we're going to make an aggregate map available in Shoresh Maps, and we could do that, but it wouldn't be a representative sample of anything. It would just be, the organizations that have used this service. But I guess first, this is a question for Simon. Simon, how are you using this as a historian for historical research?
Thanks so much. It's a great question. So I see 2 applications. One is for understanding how people represent these journeys and what they choose is important, and that reflects these journeys, right? So very similar to what Raquel was demonstrating about the significance of address to that immigration story, right? We have hopefully 10,000 submissions, it's possible from sort of an anthropological perspective to look at what people choose as representative, right? Why is it X number of candlesticks, X number of dresses or naturalization papers? So there's the representation question, and then there's just the possibility of finding more information about immigration itself, right? Through the making of availability of artifacts that are in people's homes, right? And in those boxes, right? That tell all sorts of stories that we don't yet know about because we haven't collected them. And I really do think from a pedagogical perspective, that's really where the potential is. Even we have almost 70 objects that have been submitted by the public, which is not a huge number, but I can use a good number of them to teach about immigration policies, about the kinds of things people brought, how they needed to apply for citizenship, etc. So there's a lot of pedagogical potential to this in my mind. And one thing we haven't succeeded in doing yet, but hopefully we will, and what was part of the purpose was to demonstrate the diversity of Jewish migration, right? That it is not, there's a perspective here that this is mostly from Eastern Europe to the east coast of North America. And obviously the immigration story is much more diverse than that. Because of our location, the diversity is not fully represented yet, but hopefully will be in the future.
Well, that's really one of our goals. And so we encourage communities that are already diverse to use this service in particular because it highlights the diversity of their communities that they might not even know about, and we also encourage this for communities that think that their members are all from a particular place, like all Ashkenazi, for example, because maybe they'll find that they're not, and they'll also find that there's diversity in the migration patterns and years that they came. But also similarities. And so that's where I think what Jacob was talking about regarding finding people who are from similar places, or Simon, you mentioned that in your work as well. Ruth, I want to ask you about applications. So you mentioned doing this project in order to highlight migration histories of American Jews. Tell us more about how you apply that to contemporary issues.
So first of all, I want to say I'm moved by what everybody else is doing, and I think this is really a great thing. I mean, it's not quite, as I say, it's not quite why we started it, but I love the idea of coming to you guys and doing some more of the mapping of this congregation and getting more people to participate, because I think the stories are fascinating. But my notion comes out of really trying to help people draw parallels between the immigrants that sometimes work for them, service them in various ways. And also I'll tell you my conversational gambit. So I do a lot of speaking in synagogues about immigration. I think the good thing is I'm asked. But when I go into a congregation, I usually point to two people at random and just ask them if they would stand up and say, like, which ancestor, who do they know who came to this country? Where did they come from and why? And I mean, you all know the answers. But when they're finished, I'm almost always able to say, okay, so the two of you are second generation Americans. And people immediately take umbrage. Like, what? And I'm like, yes, that's right. Your grandparents were immigrants. You're a second generation American. And we're talking about the people today. Anyway, I'll tell you the responses I get, which explains why I keep doing this. Inevitably, somebody puts up their hand and says it was different when my family came. And I say, actually, it wasn't different. Nothing you can tell me that I can't match story for story. I'm dealing right now with West Africans, Venezuelans, Mexicans, Chinese. By the way, the West Africans fly into Mexico in order to get into this country. So I say, just you tell me what you think is different and I'll match you. And then somebody usually says, well, it was different when my family came because it was legal. And then I say, if your family came here before 1924, there were no laws. So that's your definition of legal. It depends, you know. And the laws that were passed in 1924 were included an effort to keep Jews out. So I go there, but it's really to build a consciousness. Oh, and then the other thing is that people in New York, this only relates to those of you in New York will appreciate this, but people then often say, like, I don't know any immigrants. And so like this that you're talking about. And so I always say, do you have your food delivered? And they say, what? And I say, everyone who delivers food in New York is a brand new immigrant. They're sharing motorbikes. They're sharing, order menus. Anyway, so it's just a way of sensitizing people to the universe that's around them. Sometimes, as you know, and some people are very sensitive to this, but sometimes in their own homes. I get calls from people who say, like, I don't understand this whole immigration thing, but I'm worried about my nanny.
So you're really personalizing it for them, both among people they interact with and within their own families.
Right. And Sarah, just to be grandiose about it for a minute, for America. I mean, we are very busy throwing out people who were essentially our grandparents.
Yeah. Susan and Raquel, would you like to add something to these two questions?
I would perhaps add why I'm mostly interested in this, and I'm doing a lot of genealogical work on my community. This community have been living in Morocco for almost 2,000 years. They left, most of them, Morocco about 50 or 60 years ago, and they lost their memory. Most of them, or a lot of them, lost their memory. And all these migration artifact, genealogy, etc., is for them to know their past and to be conscious of where they came from. Socially, I mean, the kind of society they came from. And that's by building all these stories, etc. That's my goal, in a way.
Yeah, and I would add that I think the more you learn about your family's immigration, the more it sensitizes you to the immigrant experience. And we have always, there's always been an animus about immigration. It was always whatever the newest group was, what became the target. And we started with the Chinese and we just went on from there. And when you look at immigration laws and practices over time and how they affected the Jewish population, it's disturbing. And I think, I certainly carry that over to how I respond to current day events. And I think that's important for people to realize that connection, that, we all are immigrants at some point in time, our families, and immigrants can contribute a great deal to our countries. So,
absolutely. Jacob, I'm wondering, when the people submit their forms, how confident do you think they are in the locations that they say their ancestors are from? Getting back to something Susan was talking about earlier.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of room in the form to explain maybe where you got that answer from or like how you came upon it. So we ask people to provide as much context as possible. We don't really have the resources to do like a deep dive genealogical study of that, but we can point people to different resources that they might want to check out. Like Jewish Gen, for example, is a great database of Jewish towns all around the world, and you can actually even search for them using like a fuzzy search. So if you're not sure what the spelling is, it'll be really good at picking out the different possibilities, and then you can dive into that and even look at like citizenship records. So there are a lot of resources that people can use before they even fill out the form, I would say. But we also have people on our team, mostly me, who can figure that out and take things kind of into historical context. And just one thing that I wanted to highlight, like responding to some of the other panelists here, is that I really am a firm believer in like the power of maps to tell stories and invite questions, make conversations. It's like so important in this day and age to have not just like basic geographic knowledge, but also the historical context of like how countries came to be or how communities came to be. And that was kind of uh, the hope with incorporating some historical mapping data into our ancestry map is that people can go back in time, they can see what countries looked like. For example, I didn't know, for example, that from Susan's presentation that there was like a majority Jewish history in Latvia town. So basically having more data and adding those layers to the map, I think will help provide a lot more historical context, especially as we try to improve education and understanding of what the previous immigrant experiences were like and how we can apply that to not just our own Jewish communities, but also other immigrants.
Yeah, this is interesting. The question of what people know about their family history and what documents and items they still have. And I think about this with the notion of an heirloom. And Simon, it's not surprising to me that a lot of the things submitted to your archive are candlesticks, because that's one of the common heirlooms that people pass down the generations. Also, documents, passports, naturalization certificates. These are things that people keep and treasure. My parents just downsized recently and got rid of a lot of their stuff. And so I had to decide, what do I want to keep? What is an heirloom in my family, according to me? And they kept some things that they consider heirlooms. I already have my great great grandmother's candlesticks and a photo of her, so that's special to me. But we think of documents as heirlooms, but we often don't think about our languages as heirlooms. And so that's something that we at the Jewish Language Project are promoting, the idea that we have other heirlooms, intangible heirlooms, like language, songs, stories that get passed down the generations to us. And in particular, even if we don't get the full language, like we don't speak the Ladino or the Judeo-Arabic or the Yiddish that our great great grandparents spoke, we might get some words. And that's what we call heritage words. And so I have a podcast called Heritage Words where we talk about that. I interview people about their heritage words and the meaning they bring to their lives. Other thoughts about that idea of heirlooms as both tangible and intangible?
About the way people think about them.
Yes, and maybe Simon, you in particular, what are some things that have surprised you that people are submitting that you wouldn't have expected that they would have kept in their families?
Huh. Great question. Well, so there's a lot of jewelry, in addition to the candlesticks, and from a sort of sociological perspective, it makes sense because these are things that have both monetary value, right? That could be used if necessary, and also spiritual value. Um, there are, there was, I think one of my favorite artifacts is a U.S. Army Chow cup. So this person, it was somebody's grandparent who served in the U.S. Army, who migrated from Czechoslovakia and then served in the U.S. Army in a series of campaigns in North Africa and Europe, and had engraved both information about his own migration path and also his campaigns on the cup. And so the family kept this, as a piece of material culture, but it is associated with migration because the owner himself made the connection between his service for his new country and where he had come from on the cup itself, right? So I think that there is a tangible item, right? It's a piece of material culture, but its meaning is much more intangible, right? Or let's say another one whose grandparent took English language classes in New York many years after migrating, right? And there was a document related to that. I don't know if I remember, it was a registration card, right? And one wouldn't necessarily say, okay, this is an article related to Jewish migration because this person signed up for it many years after migrating. But the point is that this, one of the things maybe relevant to contemporary the moment is once an immigrant, always an immigrant. Essentially, you're always continuing to live this, and it's a very long process. So I think part of the intangible element is what significance people put on any kind of object. That makes sense.
Yeah. I want to answer a question that was put into the Q&A, and audience members, feel free to add more of those. This is a question about non-Jewish members of our Jewish communities and to what extent they are included or will feel included in projects like this that focus on Jewish history and migrations. So let's start by asking Susan, as president of the International Association of Jewish Genealogical Societies, how does this come up in your work?
I'm sorry, I was answering a question
that's
online.
Okay. The question of to what extent or how do the non-Jewish members of our Jewish communities feel included in Jewish genealogy projects?
Yeah, well, I think there are so many families, with both Jewish and non-Jewish members, that often, one spouse may be doing the other spouse's research. So I think they tend, there's differences in the content. So when you're working from the United States, it's going to be common content for the most part, except if you're non-Jewish, you probably go back further in terms of when you came over. So that's really the divide. I mean, I think about it when I go to like a conference like Roots Tech and they're presenting on Scotland or something, and I have Scottish family, but I have to wait till they're halfway through to get to the part that's relevant to me. And so I think there's differences in what their focus is, but a lot of the methodology and the approach is similar.
Right, and I think the point is because communities are full of all kinds of people, certainly families, so you pick up other stories. So we have one of the most recent, one of the families in my synagogue, the mother is a recent convert, but she's Asian by background, and she submitted her story, which is entirely a parallel immigration story. But the best thing was her parents came to the installation and they said, we never thought our daughter would be on the wall of a museum. And then there's somebody in my congregation whose background on one side is Shaker. And so she told the whole story of the Shakers, which I have to admit was not really up on, which again is a story of religious persecution. And so it's a way of integrating people because everybody has these stories unless you are a first family in America, Native American, you don't have an immigration story. And if you are first family, you have a land theft story. So.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Jacob, Simon, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Jacob, how does this play out in Shoresh Maps? Tell us what do you distinguish between Jewish and non-Jewish ancestors?
Yeah, so there is a question in the forum, like that asks if this ancestor was Jewish, and you can even say not sure. But we have recognized that there are going to be a lot of mixed interfaith families or ancestors who might have been Jewish. Maybe you don't know. Maybe they definitely weren't Jewish. So all of them are, part of this community, and they can be represented on the map.
Yeah, I mean, I think we take a broad approach to ancestry mapping that we want to, the whole point here is to make people aware of the diverse ancestry of our communities, whether or not their ancestors are Jewish. There's a question here about documents written in languages we don't understand. How can they submit them for translation? And I can start to answer that, and then I'd love to hear others' thoughts. One is that we do have a list of translators on the Jewish language website, and sometimes people don't even know what language they're looking at. So we're hoping to create some AI tools to help people with that. But if they do know what language it is, and if they know it's Yiddish, then there are some AI tools that can do automatic translation right now. The Lador Vador Foundation has done wonderful work in this area, and there's also another service that does automated transcription and translation of Yiddish. And I know Lador Vador Foundation is working right now on Ladino, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to support them to work on other languages in the future, because there are lots of letters that people have in Judeo-Arabic and Judeo-Persian and Bukharian. So I hope that eventually we'll get to a point where you can have a document in Hebrew letters, and you can put it into this website, and it will say first, what language is that? And then automatically transcribe and translate it, and then create a large database of these kinds of materials. And someone also mentions jewishgen.org, and there's the ViewMate service. Can someone talk about that? Raquel, do you want to say a little something about that? No, someone else? Susan?
I can
Yeah.
speak to that. Yeah, ViewMate, basically you upload what you want to have translated and you may have to adjust the size if it's too big, but and then they will post it. They'll notify you when they post it, and there are people that will go out there and translate. It helps if you go to the discussion boards and, if you put out that it's out there when they notify you and tell them what it is and what you'd appreciate them providing. They do ask you what you're interested in. It depends who does it. Sometimes you get a very detailed transcription, but usually you're going to get at least the key facts that you need to have. So you may not get an exact, with AI, you may get something more complete. They're still working on perfecting that so that, sometimes it works well and sometimes not so well. So there's a project going on right now where they're trying to take things that you've already had translated that you're quite sure about and test some new systems to see how well it translates. So that's something that keeps changing and evolving. There's Facebook pages too that focus on Jewish genealogy, where people often will put out something and ask people if they can help with it.
Yes, Simon, go ahead.
Yeah, so in our case, we require you to do a little bit of work on the research and before submitting. So we don't translate the documents, or this is self-curated, right? So that maybe it is the incentive, we hope, for some people who want to share publicly something related to their family's immigration story, to find out a little bit about it. Just again, the form is very simple, but just enough to be able to share information about approximately when the person brought it over, what it is, etc. On the question of non-Jews contributing, I very intentionally want to avoid policing what counts as an artifact of Jewish migration, right? If someone submitting sees it as relevant to some aspect of Jewish migration, then that's valuable, and it's part of what the academic interest is in determining why people make those connections.
Great, thank you. Well, we are almost out of time. I'm seeing a lot of things in the Q&A about Jewish Gen. Yes, absolutely, great source of data. And there are lots of other sources as well that you can find online, and professional genealogists that you can hire to do this work for you. So now I'm just going to end with a little pitch for the next events that we're doing. We have events coming up next week, and then again a month from today, that are about related topics, but we're really turning to genetics. We got a little taste of that in Raquel's very interesting presentation. We're going to get more information about how genetics is used in historical research. And then the following webinar will be about how genetics can relate to languages and names, how all of these can come together in helping us understand Jewish history. And in the first one, we're going to have a historian named Flora Casson, and then two people from the Jewish Genetic Discovery Foundation, Joshua Lipson and Leo Cooper. And in the last webinar, we're going to have Alexander Bader, who has researched languages and names in many Jewish communities, and he'll be in conversation with genetics specialists Leo Cooper and Jeremy Kotliar. So I hope we'll see you there at those webinars. We're also going to be posting all of these on our website in case you're not available. And I'm just going to end with some requests for ways that you can get involved. In addition to attending our other events in this series and beyond, we can help you if you're interested in bringing Shoresh Maps to your synagogue or school or organization. You should contact us through that website. You should participate in Simon's Jewish Migration Project, submit your documents and heirlooms onto that website. Also, if you want to do a program at your synagogue, like the one that Ruth Messinger talked about, or any other program using photos, using heritage words or stories, you could do a moth-like storytelling event about Jewish migrations. And heritage words is a really great, easy way for people to connect with each other. I've done this at a few events already, asking people when they put on their name tag to write their name and a heritage word that is part of their own family. That's a great icebreaker. We can also do live tapings of the Heritage Words podcast in your communities. Also, the Jewish Language Project has a curriculum for grades 4 and up called Beyond the Family Tree, Jewish History and Diversity Through Family, Languages, and Names. And a lot of that is based on migration patterns throughout history. And the students interview a relative about their own stories of migrations, languages, and names. And then they do an artistic project like the ones that we've heard about a little bit today. And then I would recommend subscribing to the Heritage Words podcast to hear more, following the Jewish Language Project and our co-sponsors on social media. Also, we're going to be starting a new program of study tours. We're going to be doing our first one in Poland in late May, early June. So if you follow us on social media, you'll get information about that. And finally, we welcome financial donations so that we can continue this very important work of documenting and raising awareness about Jewish diversity through the lens of language. Thank you very much for coming today.